So Africans are not expected to speak good English or better English.
Of course, we have these language attitudes, those stereotypes when you hear an accent.
I remember when I first moved here in class, I wouldn't want to speak because anytime that I speak, I'm asked to repeat myself over and over again.
It's not just an issue with things in public education, but even things in discrimination in the workplace.
Don't mind people saying that you are faking your accent. You know what works best for you. Just do it. If you are someone who speaks with an accent, if you live in a different country where your accent is totally different from what they are used to, you can relate to this. And I believe most international students can relate to this. As an international student myself, accent stigma has been one thing that I've been wanting to talk about for only God knows how long. I've just not had the courage to talk about it. When you think about accents and the stereotype that is attached to accent, sometimes it becomes uncomfortable to speak in public. I remember when I first moved here in class, I wouldn't want to speak because anytime that I speak, I'm asked to repeat myself over and over again. And it was very uncomfortable. It took my confidence away. That is how much accent stigma can have effect on a person. Today I have here with me Dr. Zane Dayton, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Studies at Marshall University. And his research study focuses mainly on persuasion. He's interested in how people do what they do, or what makes people do what they do. Or should I say, what influences people's actions? Did I say that right, Dr.
You did. You said it much better than me. I still have a hard time explaining that to my parents. But yeah, so Dr. Zane Dayton here in the Department of Comm Studies. First, yeah, I study persuasion. Some things that really interest me, one reason why I'm on the show today is particularly source characteristics. And one thing that's always fascinated me is things like the language that we use and the accents that we have. So what do we say and how do we say it?
As you can already tell, today we are focusing on his very recent study, which talks about accents. And the title is Americans' Attitude Towards Foreign Accented Speakers. So we are going to dive deeper into accent stereotypes today. I must say that I'm very excited that you're here, and I am very happy to be able to talk about this with you because I can show you from my camera roll, I've recorded multiple videos on accents and told myself that on this day I should make a video about it, but I've not had the courage to talk about it. So I'm very happy that you're here. Thank you for coming.
Of course, you put me on a pedestal, but yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely.
I would want to know what inspired this project, this study. What made you want to do this study?
Quick shout out to the other author on here, Dr. Marko Dragojevic at University of Kentucky. He was the one that brought me on the study as well. He was my former advisor at the University of Kentucky. We're always interested in how groups work with one another and how our group memberships that we have affect our perceptions of other people. And of course, one of those key indicators of where we belong in the group memberships that we have is accent. And so we were very curious of just kind of giving a bit more background of the study is how accents really work is that you hear somebody's accent, and then what happens is you essentially categorize that person in a group. So, being in West Virginia and also someone from Texas, you hear a Southern accent and you immediately categorize that person as being Southern from a Southern group. And then after that, that's where stereotyping comes into play. You have characteristics of people from that group, and then you stereotype them. You assign those characteristics to that person. We have things called language attitudes, which are based on those accents, and we tend to evaluate people on perceived competence, so how intelligent or educated somebody is, and perceived warmth, so how friendly, approachable, nice, things like that. One thing about this study that's interesting is most people combine those language attitudes and stereotypes together. However, we were interested in the fact of are stereotypes actually separate from those evaluations themselves?
Were there any stereotypes that stood out as particular strong or surprising?
To kind of highlight that difference, one example that I'd like to use is we have general stereotypes towards groups, right? And then, of course, we have these language attitudes, those stereotypes when you hear an accent, right? And so for this study in particular, we used 5 accents. We used a French accent, a Hindi accent, so primarily found in India. We used a Vietnamese accent, a Mandarin accent, so for Chinese, and then we also used a Russian accent. So what happens is when you hear a Russian accent, for example, you generally, as Americans, we might categorize that as someone being from Russia. And then we evaluate them, for the most part, on perceived competence and or perceived warmth, so how approachable, friendly, nice they are. However, we also were curious as, okay, well, what about our stereotypes of Russian people in general? We wanted to see how those stereotypes of whether or not they're competent and stereotypes of Russians in terms of how friendly, approachable they are, does that lead to how we favor them?
That makes me think about the fact that sometimes I get people ask me, "Where are you from?" And then I say that I'm from Africa. They're like, "Oh, you speak better than most people I know." So Africans are not expected to speak good English or better English. You have several countries in Africa. Different countries have different accents when it comes to English. I don't know how to describe it, but it doesn't feel so good when somebody asks where you're from because of how you sound. I remember when I first got here, I was teaching, and that was one of the most frightening thing for me because I am going to teach a bunch of students who are Americans who may probably not understand what I'm saying because of my accent. And at the end of the semester, I got someone who said in my evaluation that she doesn't speak well. That was heartbreaking. Not because I can't speak English, but because my accent is different. Where do I gather my confidence from when I have accent? And my students are telling me that I don't speak well.
You brought up a really good point. This is not just an issue with things in public education, but even things in discrimination in the workplace. Also in things in like employment and hiring practices, promotion, and things like that. But one other part of this study that's relevant to what you said is one thing called processing fluency. Uh, Formal definition of it is just our subjective ease or difficulty in processing people's language. So, stated differently, if something's much easier to understand, we like the person or like the message. We evaluate them much more favorably. The more difficult someone is to understand or a message is to understand, we evaluate them much less favorably in perceived competence and also perceived warmth. So that friendliness, that niceness, things like that. And what happens is this is why just unfortunately people that have thicker accents and more foreign accents, even if you are an incredible teacher, because you're more difficult to understand, they will evaluate you less favorably. You see this with things like rate my professors. They will. You might be a very great teacher, but if you look at the comment sections, it's of a lot of foreign accented teachers. It's hard to understand, difficult to comprehend.
Right.
And so, that's a big part of it. It's the thing is it's not they're not rating you on the quality of teaching, they're rating, especially just on the difficulty of processing the information, which is not how it should be based on the merit. But you also see this in terms of, like, 1, difficulty of processing information, but 2, going back to that social categorization, right? Take it in a regional, way. You mentioned Africa just generally. Um, Americans, we are very, very bad at categorizing accents. We're very bad at it. One, if you hear a Southern accent, we might just say, okay, Southern United States. Well, there's different dialects when it comes to Southern accents. You have Tennessee is a different kind of drawl compared to Deep South, like Texas, and vice versa. Um, Generally, guarantee in Africa, there's much different dialects and different accents. However, if we hear a what we refer to as just a general African accent, we just might categorize everyone with a quote unquote African accent as the same exact accent. We're very bad about picking accents out. And as a result, that influences how we categorize people, right? Um, Another example would be if we had, let's say, you hear a Hispanic accent. However, South Americans have very different accents than even Puerto Ricans. Mexicans have different accents. And however, when you hear that accent, we all have different stereotypes about those separate groups. And therefore, that influences how we perceive other people. So it's one, our ability to process the information, but also how we categorize the people.
From your study, I also realized that there was a part that talks about how we reduce accents by bias. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, accent bias. This is a difficult thing to overcome. One thing we do with accent bias is we just have to have more interactions with people outside of our own groups. When something is quote unquote a foreign accent, we generally don't understand that group, right? Or we don't understand that accent, don't understand the language. And so the more interactions that we have towards people, um, uh, that are essentially outside of our group, or we call that the out group, the more likely we are to avoid immediately stereotyping those types of people. Um, like if you don't have much interactions with people from the South and you hear a Southern accent, right? Our first generalization with a Southern accent is that one, they're very low on competence, but they're very high on approachability, right? Um, but same thing with processing fluency. Just because someone has a strong or thick accent doesn't mean that you should rate them less favorably. But the more interactions you have with people outside of your group, the less likely you are to rely on these types of things, right? In addition to that, with accent bias, the more people sound like you, the more favorable you are to evaluate them.
You know how you adapt to an accent uh when you hear it more. Sometimes I make videos and people tell me that I am trying to fake my accent because I'm trying to speak the American accent. But I am not consciously trying to change my accent. I believe it's because I am around a lot of Americans, so I'm gradually adapting to how Americans speak.
I'm glad you brought that up. So we call that essentially we're always trying to accommodate our behavior. From a fundamental level, that's one where we're mirroring our behavior. So at the beginning of this conversation, we were both very professional sitting up straight, but then throughout the conversation, I started slouching. Then maybe we both might start slouching. So we want to accommodate our behavior in terms of nonverbal, but we also do it in terms of language. Um, when it comes to accents, it's even more interesting. Here in West Virginia, there might be times where my Southern accent might come out. But when I go back to Texas, I tend to use some more language that's familiar with Texas, and sometimes my Southern accent comes out a little bit more. And that's just because of where I'm located. I'm originally from Texas. But the thing is sometimes when you have an accent that's either thicker or more strong, or if you have an accent that has negative stereotypes associated with it, then what you'll do is what we call that convergence. You'll try to converge your accent, try to make it more similar to the accent that you're trying to communicate with. So even with stronger accent or southern accents, if you go somewhere else where that's negatively evaluated, you'll try to reduce that southern accent to make it more or formal. It's a odd way to put it, but same thing. If you have a thick accent, you might try to sound more American because that standard American English accent, what we refer to it as, is perceived as more favorable relative to some of the thicker foreign accents.
I see on social media all the time that when somebody is trying to, is the word converge? When somebody is trying to converge and make their accent sound similar to the person they are speaking to, so that it's going to be easy to understand the person. On social media, I've seen it several times that they're like, don't do that, stay true to yourself.
Mhm.
How do you also feel when you're being asked to repeat yourself? Because it is not just about you, the international student, it's also about who you are with. If you're in America, wherever you are, they are also new to your accent, just as you are new to their accent. So I believe it is normal, it is fine to converge, try to speak like they speak so that the interaction becomes easier to understand, and just do it. If it's going to help the person understand you, why not?
that's the thing is there's no perfect answer, and it's the idea of this standard American English accent is that's even sometimes it'll be in some of the research too as like standard American English, but what counts as a standard American English accent? Um, the thing is if you're trying to converge or make your accent a bit more similar to who you're talking to, sometimes we do it unconsciously. It just happens. If you're talking with a group of people that all have similar accents and you're just talking to them, sometimes it just happens as a result of talking with them more. Just like if you're hanging around a group of people and they use a lot of slang terms, you'll probably pick up that language and start using similar terms. If you don't use the word y'all, but you're here, you probably use the word y'all a lot just because it's a quick word. It's a very great word. Same thing with language. It doesn't mean you're faking it when you use those words. It's just something that happens as a result of talking to other people. Just like we pick up language, sometimes we pick up accents, right? It's the same thing if you're from England with a strong English accent. Sometimes when you move to the United States, you sometimes lose an accent because you adapt that new type of accent. So it's not necessarily faking. Sometimes it's more of just adapting or converging to your surroundings. Sometimes it is kind of that instinctual of you want to be more liked, accepted by others. So you do that primarily if the one accent you have might be viewed or stereotyped less favorably, or due to that processing fluency aspect of it.
Do you think that listeners truly can't understand the accent, or do stereotypes shape what they think they understand?
So that's kind of what we try to answer too, is like we have stereotypes of groups, and then we also have language attitudes. And so language attitudes is that social categorization, right? You hear an accent, you associate that accent with the group, and then you evaluate them, right? You hear a Southern accent, you assume that person's from the South, and then you say, okay, this person's stereotyped as low in perceived competence, high in perceived friendliness or warmth. But then you have stereotypes of groups of people. Um, and so a lot of it is informed by stereotypes are essentially, we're taught them as growing up as a product of our environment, who you are around. Stereotypes themselves are based on the people that you grow up with. Is essentially a stereotype is a generalization of characteristics of a group. And because somebody belongs to that group, they have those characteristics. That's essentially what a stereotype is by definition. I belong to group A. Group A is known to have this, this, and this, and they don't do this. Therefore, I belong to group A. I must also do this. But what happens with stereotypes is as you get to know the person, you either confirm those, I knew it, you belong to this group, or you disconfirm it. You're an exception. That's why you hear, oh, you actually speak good for having this accent or belonging to this country. That's why you get those confirmation or disconfirmation. And so a lot of it is stereotypes a lot of times can be reduced through interactions with other people, because then what you do is you learn that, okay, maybe I shouldn't be applying so many of these stereotypes so often. So that's why interactions with other people outside of your own echo chambers and groups is so important, because that's where you learn that, you know, I shouldn't be applying so many stereotypes, right? I will say this, and I mentioned this a lot. Stereotypes are beneficial in the early stages of engaging with people because they help us reduce uncertainty. It's as simple as, okay, somebody, I'm wearing a blue sweater. You might have stereotypes of people that it's very straightforward. It's very simplistic in that nature. I don't know what stereotypes people have about people that wear blue sweaters, but then it goes to a lot more complex stereotypes based on these macro level ones like nationality, accent, race, ethnicity, and things of that nature, right?
During my first semester, this accent really it took a toll on me. So my first research paper was on accent stigma amongst international students. I never completed it. Let me take this opportunity to ask you, will you help me finish that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I absolutely love this stuff. Like I said, I usually talk to my wife about this all the time, and she gets a little burnout of it. So I love this avenue, and I love that opportunity. Yeah.
Great. I'll go
Yeah,
dig it for wherever it is now.
for sure.
So that we can start doing it.
This is great. Absolutely. Heck
Oh,
yeah.
excited.
Yeah. And one thing I guess I'll expand on a bit. I know you kind of go through that a little bit. Is not only our accents, affect our ability to process information, but also language that we use can have this kind of multiplying effect. So like if you use if you have a strong accent, we talked about that processing fluency. Another study that I did is how foreign accents, when they present complex terms like jargon, things like that, can actually be problematic. Like in the STEM field, for example, there's a large foreign population, right? You have a large, especially United States, a lot of international professors, right? And they might have stronger accents. This is one thing that we talked about in that paper particularly. So in the STEM fields, you have a lot of presence of jargon-like terms in science, communication, technology, education, math. Um, However, when you have a foreign accent and you have something like jargon, so complex terms that also disrupt your ability to process information, well, the effects of those jargon and processing information actually makes you evaluate that source even more or even less favorably when they have a foreign accent. So sometimes it's not even just the accent itself, but the words they use can make you evaluate them even less favorably. So it's just like, yes, we have accent, but then even words can add on to that negative effect.
As an international student, I think that I still need to be told, I still need to be advised on and given tips on how to be more confident and not mind my accent, because sometimes it holds me back from speaking. And I've had students in my class who were international students, and with our public speaking class, you have to give speeches all the time. Anytime these students come up to speak, it's very visible that they just want the earth to swallow them up. And then I ask them, because it's something that I can relate to. I ask them, they're like, I don't think anyone in the class understands what I'm saying. So they just don't want to speak, but they have to speak. And I tried my best to convince them, to encourage them to just do it. But honestly, it never worked. Never worked throughout the entire semester. They never felt comfortable speaking in class. So as we wrap up, I want you to look directly in your camera
Absolutely.
and then give an advice to an international student who feels self-conscious about their accent.
Know that when it comes to accent, there are some aspects that, as we know with a lot of things, especially with race, ethnicity, and gender, that we're also very aware of some things, especially when it comes to accent, that when it comes to evaluations in terms it could be teaching, especially with international students. It could be with learning and just how we're evaluated. Um, those are outside of your control, and they're due to these two factors that we've been examining. One primarily is that sometimes when we have a strong accent, just because that processing fluency or that ability to understand the information, you're just evaluated less favorably, and it's not because of you, it's just because of the difficulties processing information. And that's not a consequence of who you are, it's just because it's these things embedded in who we are. Of when something's hard to understand, it's just that implicit, less favorable evaluations. And in addition to that, a lot of this is we have these stereotypes ingrained in us, especially as we get older and older and older. Stereotypes are something that are just constantly embedded in our engagement and interactions with other people, that when they hear an accent, we categorize that person. And a lot of times those categorizations are generally incorrect. And uh, primarily that is due to our lack of interaction with people from different cultures and outside of our group. So once again, it's not you, being an international student, being from far away. It's the fact that one, it's just our lack of interaction with other people in general, outside of our circle. And then two, it's just sometimes it's not that you have to accommodate to other people. It's just be comfortable with your accent, learn, practice, engage with everyone. That goes with everyone in any group. Try to interact and engage with more people, because the more you engage with more people, the more comfortable you are with other accents and other groups of people as well.
My last word is going to be as, let me put it in a Bridgerton way. Dear gentle viewer, if you are an international student or you are a person who lives in an environment where your accent is somewhat or totally different from what is around or what everybody is used to, if you speak with an accent. I hope that this conversation helps you get out of that feeling of holding back and speaking up. Just speak. It's your accent. If for anything you can learn to speak, or you can converge and speak like the people around you so that they are able to understand you better. Don't mind people saying that you're faking your accent. You know what works best for you. Sometimes staying true to yourself is about learning to let somebody understand you better. So just do you more. My last word is to thank you again.
I really enjoyed coming on the show. Like I said, it's not too often I get it's a cool opportunities like this in this context. So I really appreciate it. Yep. I'm really looking forward to working on that thing with you too. That's really, really cool.
Very excited.
Yeah. This is really exciting. I appreciate all the cool stuff you're doing too. It's awesome.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share to a person who needs this. And remember, if you also have any person, if you know anyone who is an international student, they definitely need to hear this. So do share to them. Thank you. Until next time, let's keep learning to hear each other beyond the accent. And remember that your voice is your power. See you in the next one. Bye.